Let's continue from part 1 and follow the detectives as they piece together what really happened. Police officer Steve Dennison and his colleagues were searching homes near Rachel's apartment when they knocked on the door of number 19 Nash Court, the residence of Michael Little.
Inside the address there was Mr. Little and a friend of his, and they knew what was going on in terms of what our presence was there as part of the high-profile publicised searching of addresses. It appeared to me that it was a flat for one person and his friend was merely visiting. Michael Little was willing to direct us around his house, to show us which was the living room, which was his bedroom.
It didn't take long before the officers were nearly ready to leave.
Each flat has its own locked bin cupboard where they would maybe put the dustbin or a wheelie bin, and that was the last thing that we had to search before we left.
Officers asked Michael for the key.
At first he told us that he didn't have the key or didn't know where the key was, but we pressed the point because we wanted to make sure that we did search that cupboard before we left to move on to the next address, and he suggested that the key might possibly be at his mother's house.
Police found this extremely strange.
It did seem a little strange that a guy wouldn't have the key to his own bin cupboard, so again we pressed upon him further and kept asking him where the key was. Suddenly he was able to locate the key and unlock the door, and then he returned back into the flat. Inside the cupboard was a pile of rubbish, boxes, carpet, bin bags full of what I would presume is household waste.
Officers began removing items one by one.
So I'd picked up an item of rubbish off the pile and I just placed it on the floor next to me. As I was doing that, another officer had reached in to pick up the next piece of rubbish, and I'd noticed that he wasn't moving, and I looked across and he was looking into the cupboard, and I looked at where he was looking, and that's when I saw a leg sticking up from the pile of rubbish.
At the back of that small cupboard, detectives discovered the body of Rachel Moran.
It was a shock. It was such a small space, and really I wouldn't have expected to have found a person or a body inside a space of that small size.
After 4 weeks of searching, the hunt for Rachel had come to an end. Her decomposing remains had been stuffed into a cupboard, measuring roughly 3 feet by 3 feet, wrapped in a bedsheet, and barricaded behind bags of rubbish. The flat was only about 200 meters from her home. Realizing the two men inside the apartment could be involved, officers immediately returned and arrested them on suspicion of murdering Rachel Moran.
They both responded in a completely different way. Little's friend said something to the effect of, "Murder, what have you found in the cupboard?" Michael Little looked up and said words to the effect of, "He knows nothing about it." I got the impression that that was a genuine response, that clearly the friend was as shocked as we were, and Little knew what was there, and he'd resigned himself to the fact that his fate had caught up with him.
The flat's owner was 23-year-old Michael Little. His friend was Mark Fuller. Mark Fuller reacted angrily, insisting he had no idea what was going on. Michael told police that his friend had nothing to do with it.
We waited for transportation to come and take ourselves and the prisoners away from the scene, and the first vehicle arrived, and one of my colleagues took away Little's friend.
Mark was transported to the station. Michael remained behind, and then Michael began to talk.
He was in a position, I presume, where he felt he needed to get it off his chest as to what had happened. He'd bottled it up for a month, and now he'd been caught. He clearly wanted to disclose information to me.
In his notebook, PC Dennison recorded the suspect's words.
These are quotes. "I'm so glad you found her. I've wanted to tell someone for ages. It's such a weight off my chest. I saw all the police stuff on the news and just hoped they came here. I've not told anybody else. Nobody knows." He said, "I can't be a normal person doing this. I must be evil or something. I saw her that night walking alone, so I went over and spoke to her. She came back here for a drink and we chatted for a while, but ended up arguing. I think I walked out of the room or something, and when I came back, she'd gone to the kitchen and was stood at the side with her back to me. When I went near her, she turned around and I saw a small knife in her hand. She slashed out at me and cut me on my arm. It's a difficult situation, so all you can do is try and be as professional as you can and record it as closely as you can.
I personally felt relieved. I didn't even think of the horror of it and anything else. I just thought, thank God they found her. And we can get her back. We can have her home, and she's not going to be somewhere forever and never found. And I would have found that really hard to live with. Ray said he would have preferred that if he could keep thinking in his heart of hearts, well, she could be alive.
In my own mind, I was hoping that nothing particular had happened that had been particularly bad. But that was the end of my hopes. And I just remember going into a back room and just standing looking out the window. And my dad came through, and I just remember my dad and me just hugging each other.
It was a mixture of tremendous sadness for the family, but professional elation, I guess, in terms of we've found Rachel, which is the aim of the searches. We have 2 in custody for murder, so you've actually got the killers probably in the scene of where it happened, which was far, far more than I could ever have hoped for when I intended to begin the searches.
4 weeks after she disappeared while walking home from her parents' house, Rachel Moran's body had been found inside a storage cupboard in a residential block near her home. When police stormed the scene, the man holding the key immediately confessed, claiming he had killed Rachel in self-defense after an argument. Even the senior investigating officer was reportedly shocked by what he witnessed upon arrival.
The flat was best I could describe as squalid, really.
The detective looked in the storage cupboard.
Rachel was at the bottom of the cupboard and wrapped in a duvet, in a fetal position. A really upsetting scene, really. I actually touched Rachel's leg because she didn't look real. She looked like a mannequin, really.
While the coroner and forensic teams worked to remove Rachel's body and collect critical evidence, especially DNA officer Dennison escorted Michael Little to Queen's Gardens police station.
I asked him if he could read through the specific phrases and admissions that he told me whilst we was together at the flat.
Aside from 1 or 2 minor details, Little agreed that the written transcript of his statement was accurate and signed it.
What's rare in these cases is not so much that someone admits to an offence, but when it's put on paper and presented to that person, that they stand by their admission.
They talked about Little speaking about a girlfriend that he'd had, but none of them believed him, because none of them thought that he'd ever had a girlfriend because of his inability to speak to women when they were out together.
He insisted he had killed her in self-defense.
He said Rachel had attacked him with a small knife and cut him on the arm, but there was never any injury. He was examined and there wasn't a cut to his arm.
But the post-mortem examination told a very different story. Although investigators never recovered the murder weapon, the autopsy quickly revealed how Rachel had died.
The cause of death was severe and multiple stab wounds to the back, and 1 or 2 were so forceful.
Head and neck with a 12-inch kitchen knife that was never found.
They'd come through to the front of Rachel. It tended to suggest to us that there'd been no struggle and that he'd stabbed her from behind, and she had absolutely no knowledge of it, really.
Dried mud found on the back of Rachel's legs helped detectives reconstruct what had happened that night.
Well, it suggested to me that she'd been dragged across the grass against her will. Maybe he had his hand over her mouth so she wouldn't be screaming, and then dragged Rachel into the flat where he lived.
Forensic analysis confirmed that Rachel had been inside Little's apartment.
There was blood from Rachel inside the flat, not just in the cupboard on the landing. And based on the amount of blood and the distribution, that she was killed in the hallway.
Although Little maintained that he had acted in self-defense and that Rachel had attacked him, no forensic evidence supported his account. These findings allowed detectives to build their own theory about Rachel's final moments. There was no evidence that she had attacked him. Swab results indicated that she had been sexually assaulted. Michael's apartment was located directly across from a children's playground, and on the other side of that playground stood the building where Rachel lived. The route she usually took passed directly in front of his window, where he would often sit for hours, staring out or sketching. The few friends he had said he frequently fantasized about women and made up stories about having a girlfriend. The girlfriend he described was a woman around 6 feet tall, blonde, just like Rachel. Although he had confessed inside his apartment, his story soon changed. He now claimed that Rachel had approached him first and asked to walk with him so she would feel safer. He said that once they were inside his flat, an argument broke out, and he slapped her across the face with the back of his hand. He told an officer, "I lost it. I picked up the knife and stabbed her. I want help to see a counselor or something." But the mountain of evidence police had gathered did not match his version of a simple argument or a situation where she attacked him. Investigators did not believe him. As for the second man detained, Mark Fuller, he was released without charge after it was determined he had absolutely nothing to do with Rachel's death. Now, everyone was asking the same question. Who really was Michael Little? He had attended Greatfield Comprehensive School in Hull, where he was frequently bullied about his weight and nicknamed Pudgy. At school, he mostly kept to himself and spent time with his sister, who was 4 years younger than him. His father had abandoned the family. Michael claimed he had been beaten and abused by his stepfather, who later died from kidney disease. Michael adored his mother. She and his sister were the only women truly present in his life.
He was a man in his early 20s. He was grossly overweight. He did suffer from some depression, which he was receiving some medication for. He seems to have accepted his life as unemployed and on benefits.
As an adult, he lived in various council flats, which he neglected and allowed to become filthy. Neighbors described him as strange.
And he used to spend a lot of his time in his flat, either watching pornography, smoking cannabis, or drinking.
A former classmate said he frequently used substances that made him unpredictable. "There's always been something wrong with him," the person said. "He has a really bad temper."
The decision I had to take is whether to arrest Michael Little for rape of Rachel, even though he was already charged with murder. But I decided not to, based on the fact that I really didn't know whether Rachel was alive or dead when he had intercourse with her.
I was totally convinced that's what he'd been aiming for to start with, and that she'd probably spurned his advances, and that's when he'd totally lost it. But that's no consolation, is it?
On Friday, January 31st, 2003, 23-year-old Michael Little was formally charged with the murder of Rachel Moran. He pleaded not guilty, meaning the case would go to trial. At Hull Crown Court, Michael Little stood in the dock as the trial for Rachel's murder began. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and many wondered how he could possibly defend himself. And once again, his story changed. He now claimed that Rachel had agreed to have sex with him at his flat, and that it was actually his friend, Mark Fuller, who killed her. He alleged that Mark flew into a jealous rage after catching him with Rachel and murdered her in anger. He told the jury that Mark had gone completely crazy, using a carving knife to kill her. He claimed Mark threatened to kill him and his family if he did not take the blame. Michael told the court he regretted not doing more to help Rachel during the attack, and said he had been forced to clean up the scene, remove the blood, and hide her body. He told the jury, "I told him I wouldn't help, but he said I had no choice. I was extremely traumatized. I didn't want to know anything. I just wished everything would go back to the way it was." On the witness stand, Mark endured intense questioning. He firmly denied any involvement in Rachel's murder. He testified that on the night in question, he attended a party in the city before going to his mother's house in the early hours of the morning, the same morning Rachel was killed. Mark was never charged with any offense. There was no evidence linking him to the crime, and he had a solid alibi. Michael's accusation was nothing more than a desperate attempt to shift the blame. Prosecutor Jeffrey Marson QC described Michael's account as a pack of lies and said it collapsed under the weight of the strong evidence presented by the prosecution. When the details of Rachel's injuries and what she had endured were read aloud in court, members of her family left the gallery in tears. The prosecution laid out the full body of evidence. Michael had given multiple inconsistent excuses about not having the key to the trash cupboard. CCTV footage showed Rachel's handbag being discarded. Rachel's blood was found inside his flat, and there were no injuries on Michael consistent with his claim of self-defense. Michael had no injuries whatsoever, and there were countless contradictions in his constantly changing statements. It was an incredibly strong case, but would it be enough? The jury deliberated for 9 hours following a 3-week trial. The longer the jury was out, the more worried the police looked, Rachel's father, Ray, later said. Lead investigator Paul Davidson admitted he grew increasingly anxious that if deliberations dragged on too long, Michael might be acquitted. Wander had attended the entire trial, but she could not bring herself to enter the courtroom for the verdict. As silence fell over the courtroom, the decision was read. Michael's defense had failed to persuade the jury. He was found guilty of murder. Michael Little showed no emotion. The relentless determination of the police had finally brought Rachel's killer to justice. Paul Davidson later said, "If we hadn't found her body, Rachel's grave would have been that 3-foot square cupboard." Before sentencing, a letter written by Wander was read aloud in court. She described herself as a physical wreck after her daughter's death, and said her husband Ray, Rachel's father, had been completely destroyed. "For my husband Ray, this has shattered him. There have been times he has felt he has nothing left to live for. Rachel's death has deeply traumatized our family. Life will never be the same again. We have not only lost Rachel, we have lost part of each other." When the family left the courthouse, Rachel's sister Carrie said, "We feel no elation, only emptiness." Her boyfriend Mark said in a statement, "My greatest regret is that Rachel was taken from me and I never had the chance to say goodbye. I still cannot believe that she's gone." Justice Hooper stated that Michael's attempt to blame an innocent man demonstrated a complete disregard for the truth and a total lack of remorse. He emphasized that Rachel's murder had devastated her family and announced that he would write to the Home Secretary recommending a minimum term for Michael's life sentence. In 2007, High Court Judge Justice Beatson set Michael Little's minimum term at 25 years,